from other parts of the globe. My name is Daniel Ratilla, Program Officer for Climate and Disaster Resilience at the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, and I will be serving as your host for today's session. It is my honor to welcome you all to the second session of our webinar series, Climate Voices on the Ground, Perspectives from Different Sectors. If you joined us last week as well, thank you very much for joining us again. Today's session is titled Climate Information Needs of Coastal Communities. This webinar series is organized by the My Climate Risk Ateneo de Manila University Regional Hub, which is hosted by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. And this session is also co-hosted by the Manila Observatory. My Climate Risk, or MCR, is a lighthouse activity of the World Climate Research Program, which aims to develop and mainstream a bottom-up approach to regional climate risk. This starts with a better understanding of local contexts and requirements of decision makers, hence our webinar series, where we will explore the different contexts and experiences of climate change. Today's session in particular will look at it from the lens of coastal communities. Just some reminders before we start. Please note that the program is being recorded on Zoom. On Zoom, all participants are muted automatically as they enter the meeting room. Throughout the session, kindly type in any comments or questions in the chat box here on Zoom. Participants via Facebook Live may also type in their comments or questions in the comments section. We will collect these for the open forum later on. And finally, there will be an evaluation survey at the end of the session. Requests for e-certificates may be made through the same form. At this point, we would like to ask everyone to settle in for the prayer to be followed by the Philippine National Anthem. An interfaith prayer for our climate. All-sustaining spirit, you encircle space and time. You swirl and sing through every season. In silent stillness, you settle deep into the soul of creation. Your sacred wisdom has come to us this day in the words of ancient truth, through the words of present-day prophets, for the ones whose future well-being is formed by our response today. May our actions be formed by what has been spoken and heard and felt here today. Make us wise and faithful stewards of creation, sustained by your spirit forevermore. Amen.
Magiliw, pelas ang sinanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisiin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bukaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdiningning, ang bituing at araw niya kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang hinigaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Now, to formally welcome everyone to today's session, it is my honor to call on Father Jose Ramon D. Villarin of the Society of Jesus, the Executive Director of the Manila Observatory and a collaborator of the MCR-Ateneo de Manila University Regional Hub, to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon and good morning to us all. Magandang hapon, magandang umaga, maayong hapon, maayong buntag, kaninyong tanan. I'm very happy to open this second of our webinar series, especially this first series, which is really titled Climate Voices on the Ground, Perspectives from Different Sectors. And we will be hearing from Dr. Lau Jamero, who has been with our fisher folk for quite some time now, especially there in Bohol. I just wanted to share one story as we opened our series. Once I was in a small boat where they sort of changed the bottom of the boat and replaced it with a glass windshield that came from a truck. And so uh, we went a few hundred meters offshore to see, without diving, to see the riches of the sea. Now, that area where I was a marine protected area, and so it was quite an exhilarating sight, a lovely sight, because the corals were alive, and it was almost like being in a forest, an underwater forest, with all sorts of colors, a kaleidoscope of colors, really. Then we said, let's move on. Let's move another 100 meters to the east, and then we saw a depressing contrast, really, where there was a lot of, it was an area where you had a lot of overfishing and some destructive fishing, in fact, dynamite fishing. And so the corals were brown and they were dead. And it was a desert, really, brown and dry, even if underwater. So the contrast was startling. And I believe that our own people know that if you harm the nurseries, the corals of marine life, if you do damage to these things, then there are consequences. It is not rocket science. People know this from experience. Climate change has largely been a top-down affair. You have scientists diagnosing and I guess predicting a lot of things, and yet and the the usual strategy has been to to zoom out first, then to later just zoom in into a particular locality. And that's why this webinar series is very refreshing, because we are now employing a bottom-up approach first, where we try to listen to voices on the ground, their own experiences of climate. Climate itself can be very abstract. There is a saying, climate is what you expect and weather is what you get. But we know that even our expectations have been changed by what we have been doing to nature these last few decades. Anyhow, I'm very excited to hear really from Dr. Lau Jamero and her colleagues, who I see now in the screen. They have been at the forefront of these changes. The Western Pacific, in particular, will um, be affected because of well, more than the usual normal warm temperatures that we are seeing and that we will be seeing. This part of the planet, the sea level is rising about 3 times the normal or the mean or the average. So fishing communities will be more vulnerable, and perhaps these communities are already experiencing this. But aside from knowing this, I hope that we will also learn from one another, learn to look for hope, for signs of hope. Um, we have the inner resources um, to deal with this issue, a truly urgent issue, and so I hope that we can truly um, tap these signs of hope for not just our own communities but for the world. Let me just end by saying thank you to Ateneo de Manila, to the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, to the World Climate Research Program, WMO, UNESCO, and the International Science Council for these for supporting this webinar series. And of course, thank you ahead in advance, no, to Dr. Lau Jamero and her colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Villarin, for your insightful words and warm welcome to us all. Indeed, listening to voices on the ground can help us become responsible stewards of creation. And I think today's speaker and her colleagues will offer us a very illuminating example of this. Having said that, it is now my pleasure to introduce the main speaker for today's session. Laurice Jamero is the Resilience Coordinator of the Manila Observatory, where she works closely with local governments and civil society organizations across the Philippines to support their climate and disaster risk management and adaptation planning efforts. At the regional and international level, she also volunteers her time at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC Working Group 1, and she is a contributing author of the 6th Assessment Report. She is a consultant for climate education at the World Climate Research Program, a fellow of the Future Earth Coasts, and a working group member of the Southeast Asia Science Advisory Network. She is passionate about engaging vulnerable communities in understanding climate risks and designing possible solutions, building on existing adaptive capacities, and creating hope for the future through collaborative climate action. She is launching her own startup, EarthEdPH, which is focused on promoting climate education through knowledge exchange at the community level. Dr. Jamero earned her PhD in Sustainability Science in 2018 at the University of Tokyo, where she studied climate change adaptation in small island communities. Dr. Jamero is also joined today by Mr. Gerry Boligao, the chairman of the Sangguniang Kabataan of Pangapasan Island, Tubigon, and Ms. Jomelyn Entienza, the Municipal Environment and Natural Resources Office staff of the Municipal Government of Tubigon. Truly, it is a pleasure to welcome them today. Dr. Jamero, Mr. Boligao, and Ms. Entienza, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you so much, everyone, for spending your Friday afternoon with us. So we're actually calling in from Tubigon, Bohol. I think it was mentioned earlier, and yeah, so today we'd like to talk about our experience, specifically when it comes to the negative impacts of climate change, or what is called loss and damage. So I think most of you here would be aware that we are only 2 weeks away from the next UN Climate Change Conference. And at least for this year, for developing countries like the Philippines, the topic of loss and damage, especially financing loss and damage, is the core issue that we want to bring forward at COP27. So you might be wondering, so what is loss and damage? So from the policy side, it's defined by the Paris Agreement as the adverse effects of climate change, including extreme weather events and slow onset events. So you have the cause, which is climate change, extreme weather events or slow onset events, and the effect, which is the adverse effect, and that's what you consider loss and damage. So just for example, slow onset events could include sea level rise, ocean acidification, loss of biodiversity, land and forest degradation, and desertification, whereas we might be more familiar with extreme events, which could include tropical cyclones, storm surge, flood, and drought. Now, when it comes to the negative impacts of those events, they are generally classified into two, which is the economic losses pertaining to income and physical assets. And the second type would be non-economic losses, which cover the broader losses and damages to individuals, including loss of life and health, society, including loss of cultural heritage and indigenous knowledge, and even the environment, which includes the loss of ecosystem services. So this is the gist of loss and damage at the policy level. However, when we look at the science, it's a bit more complicated in the sense that loss and damage is associated with concepts like residual risk, or the impacts after implementing all available mitigation and adaptation options. And on the other hand, it's also being related to adaptation limits, wherein the risk is so high that there is no feasible option to adapt. And it's further classified into hard limits and soft limits. So when it comes to the science of loss and damage, there's this idea of a threshold, which is of course hard to define. But then having said that, the IPCC also says that adaptation does not prevent all losses and damages, even with effective adaptation and before reaching soft and hard limits. So yes, there is a need to look at the threshold, but even before reaching those thresholds, loss and damage can already happen, which is precisely what we have experienced here. And this is also captured by the Global Climate Risk Index, which ranked Philippines as the 4th most affected country by climate change in the past 2 decades. So we're not talking about future loss and damage. We're talking about the loss and damage that we experienced already in the past 2 decades, looking at 4 different criteria pertaining to fatalities and also losses, especially in terms of our GDP. All right, so we're talking about loss and damage, and why is it important to talk about it, and why Tubigon? So Tubigon is actually a coastal town in the western side of Bohol. And then off the coast of Tubigon, there are six island communities. And Jomelyn and Gerry are coming from one of those islands, which is Pangapasan Island. And actually, these islands are at the tip of the Nahon Bank, which is a double barrier reef, one of only 6 double barrier reefs in the world. So before proceeding, I'd like to pause here and share the floor with Gerry and Jomelyn so that they can talk to us about their experiences, the negative effects that they have already experienced here in Tubigon, because we mentioned, right, that losses and damages can come from extreme events as well as low onset events. Well, here in Tubigon, they have both. They experienced Super Typhoon Rai in December last year. And at the same time, they are also already experiencing tidal flooding, which is one of the earliest impacts of sea level rise. So first, I'd like to call Gerry to talk about Super Typhoon Rai.
Hello, good afternoon. Iyan ko na po yung experience namin po sa Bagyong Odette. December 16, by 6 a.m. PM, naranasan na po namin yung napakalakas po ng hangin at saka yung signal po is hindi na po stable. By 7, doon na po nakita na po namin na hindi na po normal yung pagtaas ng dagat kasi lampas tao na po yung sea level, parang hindi na po kami makalabas ng bahay. At saka by 8 until 11 na parang nakita ko po yung yung katabing bahay po namin is na ano po siya ng alon. So doon ko po nakita kung yung bahay namin kasi namin is kanang concrete, kung naisipan ko kung yung bahay po namin hindi po concrete, saan po kami kanang pupunta. Tas by 12 na meron po sang tinatawag na yung paglurang ng hangin. Tas nakalabas po ako ng bahay namin na tas tinanaw ko po yung mga kapitbahay namin. Parang wala na akong nakikitang bahay. Meron isa pero malayo-layo po. Tas yun na, by 1, bumalik na naman yung malakas na hangin until 4 a.m. in the morning. By 6 a.m. na ko na po yung aming isla, parang kanang nilibot ko po yung aming isla, hindi na po kami makadaan sa barangay road namin. Doon na po kami dadaan sa coastal area po namin, yung sa seaside. Doon po kami dadaan. Tapos nakita ko po kung ano talaga ang epekto ng bagyo, ng para pong hindi po namin matanggap na ganun po ang nangyari sa amin, because that's the first time po na bagyo na naranasan po namin. Kung tinatanong po namin yung mga nakatanda pa sa amin, yung bagyong Ruping, I think Ruping, pero mas malala pa yung Odette kaysa sa Ruping po. At doon na po by morning, contact na po kami ng LGU kasi wala na po kasi kaming makakain, wala na kaming bigas, wala nang ulam kasi yung mga bigas po namin na po ng dagat, na nabasa po ng dagat. Nag-contact po kami sa LGU, and then meron na po sang binigay na bigas para lang po on that day po, na meron pong ibang tao na nagugutom para maibisan po yung gutom nila.
Paano kayo nag-recover during 1 year?
Sa pag-recover po namin, meron po kaming natatanggap na mga donations, like subsidy, yung SAF, at saka meron pong iba mga relief goods. Doon po, sa manatanggap po nila ng mga tulong, pinaano po nila ng kanilang bahay. Yung iba, binili po ng kanilang, yung mga gamit po nila sa, panagat mo? Sa livelihood po nila. Binibili po na sa livelihood o sa pang-araw-araw po nila na kinikita. At yun lang po ang aming na-experience at sa Tagalog ng kuwan mo. Kanabitang. At yun na yun po, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to share my our experience in the flood. So before we experienced a natural flood like 2.2, the sea level is uprising in normal, but around we assume that we facing the earthquake October 2013, and that is the starting why we experience like floods, and it's getting worse every year. And then around 1.6, the flood was, or the water was already uprising. So we experienced that until now, and the community adapt by ventilating the houses, the roads, but there is also some houses that still having an by the sea level.
Thank you so much, Gerry and Jomelyn, for sharing your experiences in the islands of Pangapasan. So I guess just to frame everything, let me just recap what they shared about Super Typhoon Rai. So Gerry was giving us an hourly walkthrough of what they experienced on the island. Essentially, Super Typhoon Rai, the day before it hit us, it was only a Category 2 typhoon at the strongest. But then by 5 a.m. the forecast said that it's going to be a Category 5 typhoon. And in fact, so that's 5 a.m. And in fact, the first landfall in Siargao was at 12 noon. So that gave us a really short time to prepare. And eventually, Bohol was 6 in line, number 6 out of 9. Bohol was 6 in line. Eventually, Typhoon Rai reached us at 7:30. And it coincided with the peak tide, which was around 9:30 p.m., which was why Gerry was mentioning about the storm surge. So a lot of the damages that they experienced on the islands during Super Typhoon Rai, or locally Typhoon Odette, was because of the storm surges. So we did a measurement after, and actually the highest that we measured was around 4 meters of waves. All right, so when it comes to the flooding, as Jomelyn said, it started in 2013. It was initially induced by land subsidence, but then in the succeeding years, it became worse. So she was mentioning before, you have to have a 2.2 meter high level tide level in order to experience flooding. But now even at 1.6 meters high tide, you already have flooding, and that surprised even me, because 1.6 is, I don't know, very, very common and still very low for me. And these are just some photos of how their schools and roads were impacted, and the different types of adaptation strategies. So Jomelyn mentioned about how they elevated their roads and their homes. Some even built stilted houses. Some mined the coral stone so that they can use that to elevate their floors. This is the main strategy that they use. But also they practice evacuation. So for example, in the islands, they evacuate to concrete houses like the house of Gerry. But we're also trying to do more on ecosystem-based adaptation. In fact, Gerry and Jomelyn have their own projects on coral conservation and also mangrove planting. All right. So based on this experience, what are the different climate information needs of communities like Pangapasan? So we discussed this earlier, and here are our thoughts regarding this. So first, we would like to have better forecasting, especially forecasts that are able to capture rapid intensification, so that hopefully we can have more accurate and also early warning that can be given. By the time that they received the warning around 6 a.m., although the landfall for Pangapasan was around 7:30, it was already too late. The sea was too choppy, they cannot cross anymore. Thankfully, there are now studies regarding this. So this is a 2022 paper from in Bangladesh, and also another paper also here in the Philippines. So we'd like more of these studies if possible. We'd also like to have better decision making. So in the case of Super Typhoon Rai, and now we notice that humanitarian agencies tend to use forecast-based financing already for their different initiatives. So We are not sure what the motivation behind this is, but then our experience shows that forecast-based anticipatory action program is not bulletproof. In fact, it was not activated for Super Typhoon Rai because their models did not pick up the rapid intensification. So we were just wondering why we should, rely on models to decide when we should act, and if there is a possible way to integrate local ecological knowledge. So earlier, Gerry was mentioning the term lurang and all of these. These are all terms for winds because islanders have different terms for winds, and they can tell if a typhoon is coming, and they can also tell if the typhoon is also finished. And of course, we were wondering if it's not possible to include local leaders in the decision-making process. Does it have to be, fully relied on models? And lastly, circling back to the topic of loss and damage, we were hoping that we can have more attribution science so that we can clearly discern the fingerprint of human-induced climate change, especially in extreme events, so that we can support our claims for loss and damage financing. So this is our last slide, but essentially this is from a study published just last month, and it's showing the different tipping points. And unfortunately, low latitude coral reef die-off is one of the first tipping point to be crossed at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the rest are mostly relating to ice sheet collapse. So this is a very big concern for us. And if we can, get more information regarding these tipping points and these hard limits, then that would be very helpful for us. So that's it from us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doc Lau. Daniel has just some problems with the connection, so I'm going to step in for him for a bit. We have now reached the open forum section. I'm sure our audience are also interested to know more, if only we had more time, about the experience in Tubigon. So at this point, we invite our audience the participants to please feel free to send in your questions or your comments in chat. But maybe I'll start first while the rest of the participants are maybe articulating their questions. The local leaders particularly, and you also mentioned the importance of including ecological knowledge for the community for forecasting, maybe, for example. Could you share, or maybe Sir Gerry or Miss Jomelyn, share what ecological knowledge the community has found useful in preparing for typhoons or other hazards?
Maybe some any information about the RRM. How can the people prepare when there is typhoon, or any safety those things that you have to prepare, and also encourage them to evacuate, because when the typhoon when the wave are strong, we couldn't pass to the LGU or to the mainland. So that is the main reason why most of our islanders have a lot of damage, but we still happy that there is no casualties in our community.
Larry, maybe you can talk about the winds, the names you have for winds with typhoons.
So, yung ano po, meron po kasi sa amin po, meron pong sa aming dialect po, meron po sa aming iba-iba po yung tinatawag namin. So nung bagyo, hindi lang po yung habagat at saka amihan yung pong aming naranasan. Naranasan din po yung tinatawag namin na kanaway, balugo. Yung balugo po, yung pong malakas po na hangin at may kasama po malaking alon. At saka yung pong tinatawag namin na yung kanaway. At meron din po yung parang pong I think walo-walo. Hangin na walo-walo. Oh, yun po naranasan po namin yung iba-ibang klase po na hangin yung parang kasi sa amin po, sa akin lang po is ang anuhan ko lang po is habagat lang po at saka amihan. So meron din palang ibang pangalan yung iba't ibang ng hangin. At doon po naranasan po namin yung bagyong Odette.
Walo-walo po is yung parang pagkatapos ng malakas na bagyo, bigla po siyang nagka-calm. Pagkatapos nun, pagbalik nun, sobrang lakas na.
Sobrang lakas na.
2 times na speed nung unang typhoon, unang lakas na.
Yun yung walo-walo.
Walo-walo.
Bali yun yung naranasan namin around 10, biglang humina, mga 10 minutes dyan and then doon na, umikot na yung hangin. 2 times yung lakas.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you for sharing about the experience of wind. And this is something that's very concrete, right? This is something that you really need to know, like the different levels of the winds and the terms that are linked to them. Related to that, could you also expound on or maybe share about some of the ecosystem-based adaptation strategies that the community is now doing?
Gerry, maybe you can talk about CoPro, your project on the reefs.
Sa amin po ma'am, sa CoPro Hero, meron pa kaming in-endorse po dito sa LGU po namin na CoPro Hero Coral Reef Protection. Kasi po, pagka tapos ng bagyo, nakita po namin yung coral reefs namin na hindi na po siya stable yung kanyang hindi po na po stable yung lagay ng aming coral reefs, parang nasisira na po at hindi na po kaaya-ayang tingnan. At saka meron ibang like visitors po na pumunta sa amin. Tsaka ang una po talaga nilang meron po ba kayo ditong yung kanang sanctuary? At sa amin po is para po kami mahiya magpakita po sa kanila kasi yung sanctuary po namin hindi na po siya stable, hindi na po kaya-ayang tingnan. Kaya po sa amin po sa Project Bye-Bye, nag-propose po kami ng CoPro Hero nga to protect coral reef protection po.
So I also have proposed the mangrove matters. So we already know that mangrove has blue carbon and mangroves also serve as a buffer zone, habitat for the juveniles or a nursery area. So I also wanted to help the ecosystem and also the community because typhoon, we don't have any buffer zone since our corals was also wrecked. So I propose mangrove matters, and we also wanted to educate our community what is the importance And that's all.
So Gerry and Jomelyn are both youth leaders from Pangapasan, and they gathered the youth and come up with different proposals, and they are pitching this to the LGU soon.
Hopefully.
So hoping that they get the funding and support that they need.
Yeah, so we wish you all the best in your project for the coastal coral reefs and the mangrove rehabilitation. Mangroves, we know, are very important because they're able to absorb some of the energy of the tide. So we really hope you success for these initiatives. We have a question here coming in from chat. Let me read. So it says, Indonesia had decided to move their capital from Jakarta, their capital, to another location in another island in Kalimantan. One reason cited for the move was that Jakarta will sink and be submerged in water soon. As such, is this phenomena the same in Manila or other coastal cities in the Philippines? If so, based on your professional judgment, what can be recommended to our leaders and policymakers on ways to manage this impending concern?
Wow, tough question. But I guess not only in the context of mega cities, but even small islands, the topic of relocation is really complex. So in the islands, at least they have, place attachment. Their livelihood is very much anchored in their island, environment. And the same with our mega cities. There's a lot in Manila, for example, it's the political center, financial center of the country. So it's quite hard to imagine having to shift all of that to a different location. But having said that, and based on our experience, we're keeping an open mind about the possibility of relocation, more of as a last resort that we can also potentially plan for decades ahead. At least in their case, they're looking at education as one of the ways that they can upskill and potentially get a job here in the mainland, and then naturally depopulate the island. But it's really, really complex. Maybe I should let them speak about the topic. Education is a very misunderstood topic. So maybe I'd like to go first.
Actually, it's really hard to convince the community, the local or the islanders to evacuate or to relocate because of the livelihood. If they were relocated, what about the livelihood? Where can we get the money? How can we go to our life? That's why it's really hard to convince. Actually, in typhoon, it's also really hard for them to evacuate. So that is also the main reason. That's why it's really hard to convince the locals to evacuate.
But did you change your mind after, or did you change your attitude towards relocation after Odette, or is it still the same?
After all that, yes, ma'am, we
Yeah.
decided na, ma'am. If there is a typhoon, signal number 1 pa lang,
Yeah.
nandito na kami sa mainland. Kasi naranasan na po namin kung ano galakas po talaga ang bagyo. Kasi hindi na po normal yung lakas niya.
How about relocation, like leaving the island and moving here?
Parang
It's a tough question.
it's difficult to leave our island,
Yeah.
ma'am.
So this is really, I think, speaking to, the limits of adaptation. I think for outsiders, it's very easy to say that, this is a limit, and you've experienced as category 5 super typhoon, storm surge, you have to leave. But even after experiencing all of those things and experiencing tidal flooding every month for the past 9 years, you've heard from them how still it's very difficult for them to consider permanently leaving their home island. And I imagine it's the same everywhere in mega cities or even in rural farming communities. Everyone somehow are attached to their home and their land.
So thank you for that. I now turn the floor back to Daniel. He's finally back here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I appreciate how you shared that there are so many interconnected challenges and limitations. So thank you for sharing those insights through your previous answer. Unfortunately, we only have time for one last question. So from the chat, we have this question pertaining to better forecasting and warnings coming late. How then can coastal communities get closer to vital information on the climate crisis to help them be more prepared? Will climate forums such as this also help? What other ways for this crucial information mentioned by Dr. Jamero can be shared to the vulnerable sector and even decision makers?
Another tough question, but in my understanding, it's about how we can get the information, right? And how we make sure that it reaches their communities, island communities. So maybe I'll go first. For me, I think social media is very powerful. During Odette, I remember that the forecast came from JTWC, not yet Pag-asa. So I used my own social media and called it a super typhoon. Even though later towards the day, Pag-asa said it's not a super typhoon based on our local naming. But yeah, social media was very helpful for me in disseminating the information. But Gerry and Jomelyn?
For me, in island we don't have signals. The very best way to have a information is the radio, because we also around 5 o'clock we're still listening to the radio about the forecast, and then around 6 we don't have any electric, so the signal was cut off and there is no signal at all. So for me, it is good that we have a good information in the radio.
Some like voice Jomelyn mo.
Actually, we had a webinar last week on loss and damage, and they both attended from the island, and they called in using piso Wi-Fi. Yes. So they paid piso every 5 minutes, for a 3-hour webinar.
Yeah.
That's dedication. Yeah.
5 pesos is 1 hour.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Doc Lau, Sir Gerry, and Ma'am Jomelyn. We still have some questions in the chat, but unfortunately, this is all the time that we have. So thank you very much as well, of course, to our participants for your questions. This is a very engaging open forum. I wish we had more time to discuss because this is a very interesting lens to view climate risk. Just echoing what Father Villarin said earlier, sometimes it's easier to really see the big picture without zooming in consciously. So, but I'm sure all of us have picked up new insights from the presentation and the open forum. At this point, we now move on to the awarding of the certificates. So we present this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Maria Laurice Jamero for sharing her time and insights in the webinar entitled Climate Information Needs of Coastal Communities on the 21st of October, 2022. We also would like to present this next certificate of appreciation to Mr. Gerry Boligao for sharing his time and insights in the webinar entitled Climate Information Needs of Coastal Communities on the 21st of October, 2022. And of course, we also present this certificate of appreciation to Ms. Jomelyn Entienza for sharing her time and insights in the webinar entitled Climate Information Needs of Coastal Communities on the 21st of October, 2022. All certificates are signed by Ms. Jean Hardeleza Mijares, the Program Manager for Climate and Disaster Resilience of the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, and Dr. Charlotte Kendra Gotanco Gonzalez, the Director of the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability and focal point of the My Climate Risk Ateneo de Manila University Regional Hub. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Jamero, Mr. Boligao, and Ms. Entienza for sharing your time and insights with us. Daghang salamat. To give the closing remarks, may we call on Dr. Nikki Carcy Cruz, Assistant Professor and Chair of the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies at the Ateneo de Manila University and collaborator of the My Climate Risk Ateneo de Manila University Hub.
Good afternoon, everybody, to the organizers, the speakers, the distinguished guests, and attendees of this event. As a non-scientist from the School of Humanities, I was emboldened by the title of this event, Voices on the Ground, My Climate Risk. For what right do I have to have this honor of doing a closing remarks when I come from a field where I'm editor of a journal called Perspectives in the Arts and Humanities Asia? But everything is connected. You see, our students at the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies are doing a service learning course with partner communities. My class at the moment is partnered with a coastal community, a model community in San Mateo, Rizal, Buklod Tao, that's very proud of their disaster preparedness and their adaptations. And they talked so much about the things they've done so well. My students said, what more can we do? How can we help a community that is so empowered? Then, on September 26, Typhoon Karding struck. When my students met with the community again, there was such a change in tone, from being confident and being proud to having existential questions, whether or not they're doing things right. As it happened in September 26, all their preparations did not go as planned, and people went to the LGU, and the community organization said, where did we go wrong? They wanted now to change our programs, our projects. Initially, we wanted to work on recreation activities, health activities, values formation, education. They requested for other projects, more livelihood, things they did not do yet. After the typhoon, they said, we need to revisit. We need to ask questions again. We need to know, were we really prepared? And so everybody changed their tune. We need to be agile. And the students said, our role now is to listen to the stories, to ask people, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? Why did you do what you did? Where do you think things went wrong? I learned today, not just from my class's experience, but from the speakers today, that even scientists are getting surprised, that locals are getting surprised, that they find new ways again to call the wind. You know, Gerry was saying to me that was very powerful, that he's always known the wind, habagat, amihan. And then now, in his age now, after many years of being a local, it's only now that he's learning new kinds of wind, no? Tanaway, balungo, walu-walo. And the explanations for a deceptive calm of a vengeful wind that comes back even stronger than before. Just listening to their stories, I was thinking, the humanities person in me is responding so much to this storytelling. And all storytellers from whatever field they're in are being invited to join the chorus. There are people from fine arts and information design who are making animation to help people understand the story more visually through Arete sandbox projects with CCARP. There are people who are doing 3D modeling. There are people who are doing comics. Our own students, after hearing stories from their interviewees, no longer wanted to do any more research. They just wanted to capture the stories and turn it into a comic book series that later won an Ascent Award. So today, even if the talk was short, I'm going to require my students to watch it because there is a call somewhere here in that sharing. It is a call to be very vigilant, to listen. And actually the sign language the presence of sign language interpreters to me is a wake-up call as well. Have we been as inclusive with the kinds of events that we've had in the past? So I'm thinking, Lok Lao said first, we must get the information. We engage in conversation, we capture the stories and listen, retell, reach as many people as possible. Everyone has a role, the interpreters, the storytellers, the artists. I think it's when the scientists and the artists come together that the greatest possibilities for building an emotional link or environment to our fellow men happens the most. Thank you for inviting me. Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, My Climate Risk World Climate Research Program. It has been an honor to be able to give a closing remarks. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carcy Cruz. That was a very beautifully said closing remarks. And I think that we will come from this session being more enriched because of the additional perspective that you have also added to the perspective by our colleagues from Tubigon. So now, may we request everyone to please turn your videos on for our group photo. We'll give you a few moments to turn your videos on. So this will be for our documentation purposes as well. I hope you don't mind. So just waiting for the others to turn on their videos as well. We're very happy to see some familiar faces. I remember some of your names from our session last week, so welcome back. Okay, I still see some cameras are turning on. All right, so I will take the first screenshot in 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you. Now please keep your beautiful smiles on. I'll now be taking a screenshot of the second page. All right, taking the screenshot in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for that. So to our dear participants, thank you so much. So I'll let you keep your cameras on if you want, but you can also turn them off now. So at this point, we would highly appreciate it if you could answer the evaluation survey with the QR code and link that is now flashed on the screen. If you have any requests for e-certificates for the event, this may be coursed through the same form. And as a reminder, if you attended our session last week and have not yet received a certificate, please feel free to evaluate both last week's and today's sessions. So thank you once again, Dr. Jamero, and thank you, of course, to Mr. Boligao and Ms. Entienza. Can we all give them a virtual round of applause? We'd also like to thank the sign language interpreters with us today, Ms. Edna Comia and Ms. Annalisa Regis Tolentino. And of course, to all of you, thank you very much for your participation in this webinar. We hope that you have gained fresh insights on really zooming in on the climate experiences and context of communities on the ground, especially coastal communities. Please don't forget to accomplish our event evaluation form, and our tech team has also posted the link in the chat. Again, requests for e-certificates will be coursed through the same form. Of course, we hope to see you again in our next webinar, which will happen in exactly a week. That's October 28th, 4 in the afternoon, Philippine Standard Time, where we will have not one, but 2 main speakers. That will be our third and final webinar for the Climate Voices series for this year. And we will jump right into our next series after that, the Climate Research series, which will be from November to December 2022. So thank you once again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day. So just a small error. The name of the session for next week will be Climate Risk and Micro Enterprises. So while this week we were able to listen to the lens of climate risk from coastal communities, next week this will be from the lens of micro enterprises. So we apologize for that error on the slide.